In a quiet Houston neighborhood, a young woman's life was shattered by the one thing she feared most: a relentless stalker who turned her every moment into a waking nightmare. Despite her desperate cries for help, no one could save Tanisha Richards from the man watching her every move. This is the tragic story of Tanisha Richards, a woman trapped in fear and the predator who wouldn't let her escape. Don't miss out on this heartbreaking tale. Subscribe now for more details on this gripping story. People living in the West Chase subdivision of Houston, Texas, were shocked to the core by the horrible death of a lady who had lived in constant fear. 25-year-old Tanisha Richards, a young lady who had her whole life ahead of her, was murdered by a man who targeted and followed her, intending to kill her. Her tragic end forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the people we meet and the dangers lurking in the shadows. Tanisha Richards was a 25-year-old woman from Houston, Texas. As is often the case with many women her age, she struggled for a better life with all the hopes, dreams, jobs, and marriage. Though not much is known about her childhood, she was a kind and well-liked person. But her life was going to take a sinister twist when she met a man who would go down in history with her name as a victim: Bruce Wayne Gerard. Gerard, at the time of the crime, was 43 years of age, and he had a history of crime that consisted of a charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in 2005. How he and Tanisha met remains unclear, but what is known is that Tanisha quickly became the target of his obsessive and dangerous attention. In December 2022, Tanisha filed a complaint to the police, saying that Gerard had just been released from prison and had been harassing and threatening her. In her report, she said she was scared for her life if he were to find out where she resided. Based on those words, she sought help, but it wasn't enough to save her from being killed by him months later. By the summer of 2023, Gerard's obsession had spiraled out of control. He was no longer just a looming threat, he was actively stalking her. Friends and neighbors noticed his increasing presence near her home. He followed her movements, and disturbingly, he also sought other ways to get closer to her. Imagine the constant terror Tanisha must have felt during this time. Every glance over her shoulder, every shadow in the corner of her eye. Was it him? Was he following her again? Her life had become a waking nightmare. And yet, even with all the signs of danger, she could not escape the system's failure to protect her. When police arrested him later, he had some handwritten notes in his car indicating that he was going to track her through her social security number and phone records. This pattern of stalking escalated to the strangest level on the 2nd of July 2023. On the same day and in the evening, especially within the Idlewood complex, a neighbor's surveillance camera captured Gerard as he waited outside Tanisha's house. It holds a scene of him pacing back and forth. For 12 agonizing minutes, he rang her doorbell incessantly, each ringing a sinister countdown to what was about to unfold. His actions, albeit looking like he was waiting patiently for the woman inside, was he waiting for her to give in, or just for the right moment to strike? One can imagine the look of horror that must have gripped Tanisha as she was inside her condo. After more than 10 minutes of constant doorbell ringing, she opened the door slightly. Whether she was attempting to control the situation or just overpowered by the ceaseless interruption, no one will ever know. One thing, however, is sure, and that was the fact that as soon as she opened the door, Gerard pushed his way in. The monster she had feared for so long was now in her home. As soon as Gerard got into Tanisha's house, he soon exited the building. A neighbor who was disturbed by the noise he was making called the police. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered a devastating sight. From her injuries, this lady, Tanisha, was shot dead. It was a premeditated crime. The details of what happened inside remain a grim mystery, but the outcome was most certainly horrific. A young woman who had once had her life threatened and had been in mortal danger for months had been cruelly murdered in her own home by a man she had so energetically sought to escape. After the murder, Bruce Wayne Gerard was not hard to find because the police went after him immediately to arrest him. On July 5th, 2023, which was only a few days after the crime, he was arrested by the police from Houston. When they searched his car, they came across some damning evidence that showed them the extent of his obsession with Tanisha. Among the items in his vehicle were Tanisha's tax returns and a photo of her with a disturbing message scrawled across it. No weapon, no evil eye, no curse of the third party will work. No person can control or stop us. This message, written by Gerard, was creepy and gave a glimpse of what had been going through his mind. It implied that as far as he was concerned, they were a couple, and it was not going to change. even though Tanisha was trying to keep him as far away as possible. His delusions made him think that no power could prevent him from being with the woman he thought was his soulmate, the law, other people, or even Tanisha. With prior convictions, including a charge of aggravated assault, Gerard's fate in the justice system seemed certain. Charged with capital murder, his bond was not granted, and he was locked up as he awaited his trial. It is tragic enough that Tanisha had attempted to get help before the fatal incident. She had been to the police before that incident. In December 2022, she had gone to the police to report Gerard as an aggressor and to report her desperation of fearing that he would find her. This was something she was fully aware of, and the reason she went to the police was to ensure that she protected herself from the ever-increasing threats. But regrettably, the system let her down. Despite this, her fear was not enough to warrant the protection that she so badly required. This throws very important questions as to how cases of stalking and harassment are dealt with, especially by the police. Tanisha's death is an indicator that most of the time the warning signals by women who feel endangered are likely to be downplayed and ignored. If more was done when Tanisha came to report Gerard's actions, then perhaps this could have been prevented. Houston's community was left in a state of shock in the weeks that followed Tanisha's death. Some of the neighbors who testified saw Gerard stalking outside Mary's condo on the night of the shooting, saw themselves as having the chance to prevent the unfortunate incident from happening. The community joined the family in sending a SIS to the young woman who died at the hands of a man with previous assault charges. The case also helped in a revival of the discussion towards stalking and intimate partner violence. As for their relationship, it is not clear what kind of relationship these two people had, but Gerard is depicted as a controlling, aggressive man who constantly tries to dominate Tanisha, which illustrates that he has a toxic attitude towards her. For those who knew Tanisha, her death was not just a crime statistic. It was the devastating loss of a loved one. Her future, which had once been filled with promise, was stolen from her in a matter of minutes by a man whose obsession turned deadly. Her story isn't just one of personal tragedy, but a broader indictment of how our systems fail to protect vulnerable women. The unfortunate story of the life and death of Tanisha Richards is about how a woman could live a life in fear, be stalked, and be murdered. Her cries went unanswered, and as much as she tried, she could not be helped, and in the process, she was killed. Bruce Wayne Gerard, an aggressive and violent man, harassed her, threatened her, followed her into her home, and shot her dead. The man who murdered her awaits trial, and the public debates the senseless killings of women. However, perhaps a more positive way to pay tribute to Tanisha's memory is to act in ways that would force people such as her to be heard, believed, and safeguarded before they meet a tragic end.